Good morning, everybody. Dr. Vasquez here. Sorry I've been absent for the last about 15 or 16 days because I had really bad bronchitis. And so if I sound a little wheezy and bitchy, it's because I'm still a little wheezy and bitchy. Today, the agenda is I'm going to proofread the essay that I wrote this past week. I did this whole thing spontaneously. I'd say about 90% of it was done in one sitting. And then, of course, I made a few edits and modifications and then went back and looked at some old documents and administrative emails to pull some direct quotes and make sure, well, I already knew the facts were correct, but I did pull some direct quotes from the president's email, president of the university, that is, just to make sure it was completely accurate. So I've published this now on my blogs, which are inflammationmastery.substack.com and healthythinking.substack.com. I just published this yesterday. I've also posted it to academia.com. I'll show you the link. You can download this essay for free. I presume that right now is going to be the ultimate proofreading of this. I've read it. I wrote it, obviously I wrote it, and then I maybe proofread it once or twice, and I sent it out to a lot of professional friends, the few professional friends that I have, two of whom were previously presidents of universities. And I sent it out to a lot of my chiropractic colleagues. And the feedback on this article has been uniformly positive. No one has written to me saying, oh, well, I had a wonderful experience as a professor in chiropractic college. No one says that. They've all said, and I didn't even really ask for any, testimonies or anything like that, testimonials. But everyone has written back to me spontaneously saying, yes, the same thing happened to me in all the colleges, not just like one college. Colleges throughout the United States where people were either students or faculty or both. They've all said, me too. So this article, as you can tell, as you will be able to tell, is written purely from my experience. I was aware of a few articles that had been published in the Chronicle of Higher Education back in 2012. And I cited those articles within this article, and I'll read those excerpts, of course. But 95% of this essay is purely from my experience. And then a few citations here and there just to other articles that were important. Those articles, as I'll mention as I go through this, those articles that were published in the Chronicle of Higher Education, those three articles that were published in 2012 were specific to a college that I have never attended and I don't have any affiliation with. But they serve as representative examples of the chaos and administrative misbehavior within chiropractic colleges. And they're excellent examples. But they're not unique examples. They are representative of what hundreds of us have experienced throughout the field of chiropractic academia. So without further ado, I'm going to read this article as it currently stands on May 5th, 2024. As I've already said, I plan for this right now to be the ultimate proofreading, the final proofreading. And I'll make a few notes as I go through if I need to change anything. I'll try not to interrupt myself too much. I'll just try to commit to reading this, minimizing the embellishments, because I think it's already sufficient. But of course, I'll probably interrupt myself a few times, make a few notes. Like if I catch any errors, of course, I'll have to indicate that on the master document that I'm looking at. Again, I'll provide this for free. It's already posted on my blogs. I've posted it to Academia. You'll have the link for that so you can download the PDF with the graphic. So I'm going to read the text, of course, but I'm not going to read the graphic because the graphic itself is super complex. I originally designed that graphic in 2018, so it's literally been sitting in my computer for 6 years. And then, as I'm currently working on a new textbook, I decided to include mention of academic corruption within that textbook, even though the textbook itself is on neuroinflammation and and migraine. I decided to include this graphic on academic corruption, which I call the academic corruption map. I was going to include the diagram, and then of course I made some changes, and then it was on my mind, and then one night I just wrote out this essay pretty much as it currently stands. So again, here we go. The current title of this document, which is going to be published as an ebook later today on Amazon's platform if you want to read it through that medium. The current title, which is probably the final title, is called Administrative Anarchy in American Academia: Corruption and Chaos in Chiropractic, Clinical Nutrition, Functional and Naturopathic Medicine, and more. So, as usual, well, not all the time, but I do enjoy quoting Friedrich Nietzsche. You can see this picture of Friedrich Nietzsche behind me. That was a custom painting made for my most recent birthday. I totally love it. Nietzsche wrote, when would this have been? Obviously more than 100 years ago, 150 years ago. How much truth can a spirit endure? How much truth can a spirit dare? More and more, intellectual integrity became for me the real measure of value. Error, which is faith in the ideal, is not blindness. Error is cowardice. To endure my seriousness and my passion, the scholar must carry intellectual integrity to the verge of hardness. We must become indifferent. We must never ask if the truth is useful or if it will be our undoing. At every step and with every word, one has to wrestle for truth. One has had to surrender to it almost everything to which the heart, to which our love, our trust in life, cling otherwise. That requires greatness of soul. The service of truth is the hardest service. So even though that flows together quite well, those are actually excerpts from different books written by Friedrich Nietzsche. Following that quote is the diagram, which again I'm not going to read, but it shows all the interconnections. What I found working in chiropractic academia is that we didn't have simply one corrupt administrator. We had an entire ecosystem of corruption. And that's what's demonstrated in the diagram. Again, I encourage you to take a look at it and download it. If you really want to understand the complexity of academic corruption, I think I've provided a unique and accurate illustration of that. First paragraph. Chiropractic and nutrition were my first loves. More accurately, I would say that my positivistic and misinterpretation of chiropractic, my naive perceptions as an inexperienced youth fresh out of military boarding school, and what I considered to be the promise of the profession, those were my first loves. Instead, what I found in 2 of the 3 chiropractic universities where I was faculty, and in 1 Doctor of Clinical Nutrition program where I was a founding professor, was not simply 1 or 2 colluding administrators, but rather an entire ecosystem of corruption that emanated from the entire upper administration, from the president of the university to the vice president of finance, contaminating everything from the financial accounting to the integrity of exams, contaminating everything from the financial accounting to the integrity of exams and accreditation standards, but also the Board of Trustees, which supposedly had responsibility for the supervision of the administration, and also the selection of the president himself. I found that accreditation was a completely worthless stamp of approval provided by privatized regional accreditors who were paid by the very schools they accredited for the programs that were approved, regardless of the veracity of the submitted documents and the integrity or lack thereof of the program, including completely changing program requirements after the program and changes had been approved, and the administration's implementation and allowance of a corrupted online examination platform that allowed students to pass quizzes and examinations without any study, simply by clicking on the provided answers until the correct answer was made obvious. The students cared more about academic integrity than did the administrators. The regional accreditor apparently couldn't care less as long as the school was paying for the accreditation processes and making things look pretty, and the U.S. Department of Education obviously had no fucks to give and could not be bothered. The infographic accompanying this narrative depicts my painful personal and professional experience in chiropractic academia. Again, chiropractic was certainly my first love, and I dedicated many years of my life to being an ambassador, scholar, and cheerleader for the profession. I traveled thousands of miles to deliver hundreds of hours of graduate and postgraduate education. I authored dozens of articles for the profession and several textbooks specifically for chiropractic students and clinicians. One of the biggest disappointments of my life will forever be witnessing and experiencing the shameless and unbridled corruption within the administration of chiropractic colleges, many of which have now rebranded themselves as universities despite not meeting strict criteria for such. To have a corrupt administration, one must begin with corrupt administrators, which is to say people with ulterior motives and/or sociopathy or psychopathy. Psychopathic and narcissistic traits are common in the general population, typically estimated at 1% being severe, with 10 to 30% being mild. And these traits, I might add that. And these traits are higher in certain groups, namely incarcerated prisoners and organizational administrators. Thus, we cannot be surprised that some of these sociopaths would eventually infiltrate academia, then seek, obtain, and defend positions of power and profit. Furthermore, and perhaps somewhat specific to chiropractic, is the lack of oversight, because the schools are impressively small compared to legitimate multi-program universities, and the relatively lower academic standards, for example, no entry examinations and no external standards for graduate performance. So I'll read that again without the details, just to make sure it flows well. Furthermore, and perhaps somewhat specific to chiropractic, is the lack of oversight and the relatively lower academic standards, which facilitate the entry and perpetuity of academicians with lower qualifications, lower scholastic and professional achievements, and a much more casual and narrow perception of what might otherwise be rigorous academic standards, which they themselves have never experienced. So hopefully that flows better, or hopefully it flows reasonably well together. I tend to write really long sentences. So you just have to deal with it. If you want short sentences, you can go to someone else. But I do tend to write long sentences because I'm trying to connect a lot of ideas together, and that's just the way I do things. But I think that that's a competent sentence, even though it's a bit long and with a lot of parentheses, etc. And everything I said in that is completely true. I have certain perspectives and experiences, having gone to chiropractic college. I graduated in 1996, and then I went to naturopathic medical school. I graduated in 1999. I practiced for about 6 or 7 years, and then I went to a really hardcore osteopathic medical school and graduated in 2010. And that experience, I'm not saying my medical school training and education was the best, even though it was a top-ranked medical school in the United States. But that experience showed me the possibilities of what could be achieved in an intense educational program. Again, I'm not saying it wasn't the best of my educational experiences, but it was certainly the most intense and the most transformative. So that's some of what I'm alluding to in that last sentence that I finally managed to get through. Again, due to the relatively lower entry standards for students and administrators and the overall lack of internal-external oversight, chiropractic colleges are attractive targets for swindlers and sociopaths. Those who strive and try to survive within chiropractic academics often refer to the experience as Chiroland, analogous to the surreal and illusory Twilight Zone, and often chuckle that chiropractic administrators would happily eat their own young in order to maintain their positions of prestige and profit. In a profession that offers, so all of that was good and accurate. Many years ago, a video was available on YouTube. I think the title of the video was, "So You Want to Go to Chiropractic College," something like that. Or "So You Want to Be a Chiropractor," maybe. Somebody had done this video. It was a cartoon, and it was absolutely perfect. Even though, of course, many of us didn't want this perspective. It was certainly consistent with our experience. Even though, as everybody in a profession is going to be loyal to that profession because they've worked hard to achieve that degree and that diploma and the licenses and all that kind of stuff. So, regardless of how good or bad a profession is, anyone within that profession is instinctively going to be loyal to it just because they've worked hard for it. So, again, a video was available, and I wish I could find it. I have looked for it many times. I may have archived it somewhere, but that would have been 20 years ago. Anyway, if you're able to find it, again, it was a cartoon video called "So You Want to Be a Chiropractor," or "So You Want to Go to Chiropractic College." And it also perfectly described or represented everything I just said, represented. In a profession that offers only a very narrow range of opportunities, number one, hardworking private practice clinician; number two, adjunct faculty member with no benefits or job security; and number three, upper administrator with full benefits, retirement, free international travel, and additional bonuses, those few chiropractors who acquire an upper administrative position cling to that prestigious and profitable outpost with tenacity and desperation. That was accurate and well stated, if I may say so. One of these chiropractic presidents confided to me that because upper administrators selected the board of trustees, and the board of trustees selects the president, all they had to do was pick the most naive, enthusiastic, passionate, and gullible alumni to join the board of trustees and go along with any and every suggestion offered by the upper administrators, including effectively paying themselves performance bonuses based on the profit of the school, despite the fact that all these schools are tax-protected nonprofit organizations. And in their hands, this ultimately meant siphoning scholarship money away from students to inflate the perceived profitability of the school and thus fund their so-called performance bonuses. I remember when one of the Board of Trustees member was being informed about the corruption of upper administration, her reply to me was simply that it broke her heart to hear such things, and so to stop her small heart from breaking, she simply refused to listen to disgruntled students and betrayed faculty members. Which is to say, she refused to listen to the exact people who had boots on the ground experience. Of course, she never participated in or initiated any investigation into the obvious wrongdoings, repeated disappearance of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the mass firings and gaslighting that were ruining the school. Emotional reflexes and administrative protectionism were the guiding lights for her trusteeship, and this is exactly why she had been chosen for the Board of Trustees by the same people who would benefit from her naive and unquestioning loyalty. Nepotism and self-overpayment of administrators are notorious in chiropractic academics. And you can see this. And I invite you to do it. I'm not going to be the one to do this. But I invite you to do this if you're interested in academics or chiropractic or integrity of educational programs. You can go to the websites of any and all chiropractic colleges and take a screenshot before they change it, because I presume that once I launch this ebook, I presume a lot of these schools are going to start trying to cover their tracks. But if you go to these chiropractic college websites, now a lot of them call themselves universities. But if you go to their websites, you can copy or screenshot the administrative roster, so to speak, the hierarchy, and you'll see that the presidents very commonly have hired their wives to be executive assistants. And then you go down to the vice presidents, and again, some of this you won't know unless you know the actual people and their families and all this. But obviously you can look at their last names and you'll see, oh, the last name of the president is the same as the last name of the vice president of academic affairs, or the executive assistant to the president, or the vice president hired his son to be the director of whatever their program is. So you'll see a lot of it. Some of it's public, some of it's not, but most of it is public. And you'll see that in chiropractic colleges that call themselves universities, you've got husbands hiring wives. You've got fathers hiring their sons. And that's called nepotism. And it's, when it's done so brazenly and at this level of volume, it's illegal, because equal employment requirements are that when a job is available, they have to make it available publicly. They have to take applicants. No way in hell the best applicants happen to be in the president's family so consistently. So that's called nepotism. Nepotism is giving jobs and favors to friends and family, and it's notorious throughout the chiropractic Chiroland world. Nepotism and self-overpayment of administrators are notorious in chiropractic academics. For example, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education, written by Fuller in April of 2012, the compensation packages of presidents at chiropractic colleges consume on average 2% of the college budget. That's 5 times as much as the typical president at a private college with a budget over $50 million. Some chiropractic college presidents earn nearly as much as leaders of research universities that are 10 times, even 90 times their size. the presidents of chiropractic colleges are taking in some of the biggest paychecks in higher education. Many chiropractic college presidents and vice presidents use their schools as welfare states for their families, including sons, daughters, wives, and more distant relatives. For example, quote, and I'll just give some partial quotes here. Wife of the president of a chiropractic college worked as the vice president for student affairs. His daughter was assistant to the president, and the sister-in-law served as assistant to the vice president. Unquote. Again, as I said before, all one has to do is visit the websites of the chiropractic colleges, an easy task for any reporter or staff journalist, to see the names of parents and children among the list of administrators. According to the Chronicle of Higher Education, Stripling 2012 April, the president of this given chiropractic college hired his wife to serve as dean of university programs, and also gave employment to his son, stepdaughter, and daughter-in-law. As would be expected, chiropractic administrators commonly hire friends and family into administrative and teaching positions without conducting the legally required competitive application processes. This undermines quality and destroys the goodwill and respect among those faculty and administrators who actually had to apply and compete for their jobs. If regulators at the state and national levels cared to look, they would find a superabundance of illegal behavior, including underpayment of adjunct faculty, which translates directly into wage theft, which is failure to pay for required duties, tax evasion, because less salary paid means less state and national tax income, and greater profitability. So the upper administrators underpay faculty in order to increase the perceived profitability of the school, because some of them, too many of them, receive performance bonuses based on the profitability of the school. So how do you make the school more profitable? You underpay the faculty, for one, but that's wage theft because it's tax evasion. Well, it's wage theft and tax evasion. The administrative theft doesn't stop just because the president... Oh, I just wrote this morning. The administrative theft doesn't stop just because the president formally retires from the office that he occasionally visits. Some chiropractic presidents give themselves golden parachutes and lifetime payouts even after they leave the school, as if a tenure of thievery were not already sufficient, thereby ensuring that future students and faculty will continue paying financial damage for the legacy of corruption. Again, a note of clarification. The two paragraphs above and below cite articles published in the Chronicle of Higher Education, all of them in 2012, specific to nepotism, profiteering, faculty-student abuse at Logan Chiropractic College. I personally have no experience with that institution, but I see the examples provided as being clearly representative of the types of unprofessional shenanigans that plague the profession and permeate throughout chiropractic academia, even at the quote-unquote best, unquote, chiropractic colleges and so-called universities. So yeah, the reason I keep saying it that way is because some of these chiropractic colleges became universities, quote-unquote universities, which means they have to provide, different programs at different levels. And they don't do that. So, strictly speaking, they're not universities. Sometimes what they do is they form what are called articulation agreements with other universities to virtually merge programs, so to speak. So they'll work with another school that'll provide like the undergraduate programs. But those undergraduate programs are part of the requirement for being called a university. So a lot of these schools are not legitimate universities. But they've basically frauded the paperwork and frauded the process to call themselves universities. And I'll describe how that happens in more detail in just a moment. So here's the second paragraph on that same theme. To cover up and legitimize nepotism and self-overpayment of administrators, chiropractic administrators commonly use fake independent reviews and audits. For example, according to Chronicle of Higher Education, Stripling 2012, October, this particular chiropractic college that's being discussed in his article had paid their upper faculty, the president and the wife, the vice president, they had paid themselves more than $1 million for the president, who was the husband, obviously, to the wife, and then their son, and then the son's wife. She earned $40,000, and she didn't even have a legitimate job. Her duties were unspecified in the documents. Again, quoting from this article from the Chronicle of Higher Education, Logan, the chiropractic college being discussed here, uses an independent third party to conduct presidential compensation analysis every 2 years. And the college's full governing board reviews that information before approving pay levels according to the tax form. So that's the end of the quote, and then I follow that up by stating, any college or university can pay an accounting firm to review the submitted documents and approve them. The guaranteed means of success are, number one, submit only the scrubbed and accurate appearing accounting documents, and number two, work with an accounting firm that understands that its job is to give its stamp of approval to whatever documents the administrators provide. I think that's sufficient and complete, but of course I usually have to add a little bit more commentary. So when I was in chiropractic, I'll just say when I was a chiropractic faculty member, the accounting documents were completely fraudulent. Complete fraud. Absolute fraud. Absolute disappearance of hundreds of thousands of dollars. But everything looked okay on paper because the administrators would scrub the documents and then send it to the accounting firm that they've selected and that they're paying, and the accounting firm would say, oh yeah, it looks great. And then the administrators could report back and say, oh, well, we had this independently verified. Well, yeah, if you give an accounting firm fake data and you work with an accounting firm that knows that knows the game that's being played, you're damn right they'll approve it. So again, all of this was just shocking to me when I went into, academia in Cairo land. How everything was bullshit, basically. Everything was bullshit. And the other thing, this was another, obviously, red flag, but I remember talking to my so-called boss when I was a faculty member. The first, I went into academia having already been a scholar and academician because I had been through 3 doctorate programs and I had written 20 textbooks and hundreds of articles. So I was already a professor in different schools. So I was already an academician, but I wanted to be a better academician. I wanted to learn from these people, how to be a better teacher and how to be better at what I loved, which was teaching. So, I was pretty bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when I went into academia. But I remember one of the first meetings I ever had with this woman who was supposedly my boss. On paper, she was my boss. One of the first things, because my ears perked up, I thought, wow, I'm about to learn how academia works. But I remember one of our first meetings, she said, we, the upper administration, she said, we have to maintain plausible deniability on everything. And she said, that's why you shouldn't send sensitive information on school emails, because she says that kind of breaks the shell of this facade of what is called plausible deniability. So, right out of the gate, this was literally within my first few weeks of working as a faculty member. Right out of the gate, she was telling me that we live in a bullshit la-la land where we deny reality. And the formal term for that is plausible deniability. The chiropractic presidents that I have known had not the slightest qualm about hiring their wives and children into upper administrative positions. I should say vice presidents as well. That's a story that I would like to elaborate on, but I'm not going to elaborate on. But I am going to say chiropractic presidents and vice presidents had not the slightest, and that doesn't mean that all of them were chiropractors. Some of them were PhDs or a doctor in education, but they were upper administrators at the doctorate level within chiropractic schools. The chiropractic presidents and vice presidents I have known had not the slightest qualm about hiring their wives and children into upper administrative positions, including the very board of trustees itself, even when their spouses had no legitimate reason for having any official affiliation with such nonprofit. Hold on. Even when their spouses had no, I should say spouses and family. For example, in one of the chiropractic colleges where let's just say I knew what was going on. The president somehow put his wife on the board of trustees, and maybe even in other positions. But she didn't even have a college degree. And she's working side by side with, doctorate level academicians. And I don't even think she graduated high school. She had like a GED. I believe that's what was told to me. So here's the president's wife who hasn't even graduated high school, or she had the equivalent of a high school diploma, a GED as I recall. And she's on the board of trustees of a chiropractic quote-unquote university. Even when their spouses had no legitimate reason for having any official affiliation with such a nonprofit academic institution, their wives were given administrative privileges, including free national and international travel to whatever conference had any tangential relationship with healthcare and academics. Administrators used quote-unquote nonprofit educational institution money to get free paid vacations to anywhere in Europe that they wanted, and of course they could always extend that trip by having to attend more than one conference per trip, thereby justifying a layover of a few weeks. And this was all consistent, as one chiropractic president told me about the trips he made to Europe with his wife at the expense of the school. He specifically told me that I spent 2 weeks on the beaches of Italy letting all my concerns drain away. And I thought to myself, you're a real bastard, because we were busting ass on campus to keep the school going and to keep advancing the programs. And we had no infrastructure and no stability within the school. I mean, everything was just absolute fucking chaos on that school. And at the same time all of that was happening, this guy tells me that he spent 2 weeks on the beaches of Italy letting all of his concerns drain away. The chaos was so bad, for example, among many examples, endless examples. I mean, the infrastructure of the online resources was so horrible. Like, I had to post videos on YouTube because I couldn't get the videos on the online program, platform, I should say. I mean, it's just absolute chaos. But, you know, this bastard wrote to me precisely at that time saying I spent 2 weeks on the beaches of Italy letting all my concerns drain away. And that is a direct quote, because I saved all the emails. Then he attended another conference in Scotland, noted here as directly quoted from his university president's email. Quote, "Scotland is beautiful and the people here are friendly and helpful. The food is much better than I had expected. The Scottish lamb is grass-fed with unbelievable flavor. Last night, with his wife, who was listed on the university website as executive assistant to the president. Last night, wife and I attended a session on the history of Scotch whiskey and then had a sampling. It was fascinating," unquote. That's directly copied and pasted from his presidential university email directly to me. At a time when absolute chaos, this was different from the previous one, but another time when this campus was virtually on fire with chaos and corruption. And this guy's in Scotland drinking whiskey. This was all the while the faculty on campus were desperately putting out daily fires of incompetence and corruption to keep academic programs afloat. The true leadership was on campus with their sleeves rolled up and working hard, not knowing they were already on the chopping block to get fired. While the president wasn't presiding over anything other than his personal pleasure, profit, and leisure. This particular president was noted for pretending to be a Mormon and thus abstinent from vices such as alcohol. But he let his vices and whiskey take the reins when such suited his personal whims and desires, never for a moment prioritizing the university nor the chiropractic profession. Note the irony of his sending notes of his European vacations from his official presidential university email while all hell was breaking loose on his campus. To which he would return and pronounce, "Don't tell me about problems, tell me only about solutions," to ensure that he had shifted the responsibility to the faculty to be Pollyannic, positivistic people pleasers instead of honest professionals. Anyone who told the truth on that campus was ensuring that they would be promptly eliminated, as I learned from experience, immediately followed by threatening letters from their pit bull, profit-protecting legal henchmen. Excuse me. all of that is true, and it sucked. So in the process of reviewing this, and I wasn't trying to make this, some hyper intense document, even though it turned out pretty intense. I went back and looked at the emails I had archived. And one of the last emails, I couldn't even read it, and I didn't want to read it, but it was written by me. And I was just pleading with this guy to give us some stability on campus. And I remember, I don't know if I included this in the article. I hope I did, but I may not have. But let me just make a note in case I didn't include this later. Right around the same time, I had a meeting with the president, who pretended to be my friend. I stayed at his house. He used to pick me up at the airport. He used to call me literally crying on the phone when he had personal problems in his own family, And so, I had reason to trust him. He behaved as if I could trust him. He demonstrated, some basic level of sociability. He was vulnerable, and to the extent, like I just said, he would call me crying about his personal problems. And I didn't want to hear that stuff. But, I thought, well, this is part of, being a real friend is, listening to his vulnerabilities, so to speak. So I thought we were friends, But I remember right around the same time meeting with him in his office. Again, I'm kind of referencing one of the last emails I looked at the other day, 2 days ago. I didn't want to read it, but I was just basically pleading with him. I was saying, look, just give us some stability on campus. But here's exactly what I said to him. This was one of the last conversations we ever had. I said, look, I only need one thing from you. I need you to let me function as a professor on this campus with integrity. That's a little bit of a paraphrase, but that's basically what I said. I'm trying not to be too revealing, of course, with details. But I did say that because by that time I had given up. We had no infrastructure. We had no intellectual infrastructure on the campus, zero. But we also had no logistical infrastructure. Like I said, I was uploading my videos to YouTube because nothing worked on the campus. So by that time, I didn't even need anything. I had learned how to do my own videos. I had learned how to post them on various websites. I was doing everything kind of independent of the school's infrastructure because the school's infrastructure didn't work. And that's something that I'm about to talk about here, is when the school reaches, let's say, a critical mass of corruption, and that's a reasonably good phrase to include. A critical mass of corruption. When so much corruption by so many different people within the upper faculty and staff is taking place, no one is going to perform at their job because they don't have to perform at their job. If they're all getting kickbacks and they're all part of a system of corruption, they can't be held to any accountability because anyone who would hold them to performance accountability realizes that, they could become a whistleblower or they could reveal documents or something like that. So once a school like this, again, it was just incredible. Once a school like this reaches a certain level of corruption, nothing works. No one is held to accountability because At that point, the priority of the school isn't function, it's profiteering. And in order to maintain, thievery here and thievery there, and free vacations and whatever else, in order to keep that going, they can't hold each other accountable. And you'll see this in the next paragraph. Just bewildering the stuff that was going on. So, again, I might include that quote. Of course, while the cat is away, the mice will play. And when presidents and their administrative wives are on a school-funded vacation in Europe, we, as the remaining faculty, could anticipate new waves of administrative chaos whenever the president and his wife were on one of their extended vacations. Second-level administrators would buy tens of thousands of dollars worth of unnecessary school furniture, equipment, and infrastructure when the president was absent, apparently without any trace of paperwork. This is another conversation I had directly with the president. He was actually sitting in my car. We were going to lunch, and we were driving, through the campus when we were exiting by the library. And the library had a new building attached to the library. And the school president, sitting in my car as we're driving by the library, commented about the new building that had been built next to the library. Again, second-level administrators would buy tens of thousands of dollars worth of unnecessary school furniture, equipment, and infrastructure when the president was absent, apparently without any trace of paperwork, because upon his return, the president himself commented to me how baffled he was that a $70,000 extension had been added to the library without his approval, prior knowledge, and apparently without any paper trail. The school's money disappeared and the unneeded building appeared as if by magic, clearly showing that this university president had no idea what was happening on his campus and had zero respect even from his fellow upper administrators that were misdirecting and robbing the school. So that's a long paragraph, but again, I'm trying to put out that idea, that image in one sentence before moving on to the next one. But yeah, that's what happened. So the president is sitting, we're going to lunch. We're driving by the library. There's a new extension added onto the library. And he says that building cost $70,000 and I have no idea how it got there. So obviously that's a red flag for me, as a professor in the program, in the school, because he's so dumb. He's showing that he has no control over what's happening on his campus, and he's also showing his willingness to be stupid within that context, because a building can't just be built. A $70,000 building with equipment inside it cannot simply be built without a paper trail. Somebody paid for that. Somebody authorized the bank transfers. So if this guy wanted to have his head out of his ass, he could go to the bank and say, hey, who signed for this? Who wrote the check? Who initiated the transfer? Because he knows it was $70,000. So obviously he's got some paperwork somewhere. He only needs to see one signature to know who paid for this, to know who authorized it. But in this particular school, like I said before, so much corruption was happening so fast in so many different departments. And I suspect that the upper administrators were paying themselves off through fake companies external to the university. So, for example, the school could pay $70,000 for the construct. I mean, come on. This had to be permitted. This had to be built, and then they had to hire electricians. They had to hire an architect. They look at all the work that goes into a $70,000 library extension. And this president is telling me he couldn't figure out what was going on. He said they built that while I was gone. But again, what I think was happening was that upper administration. See, and here's another detail, which is pretty obvious, but I'll say it anyway. Only a handful of people would have the authority to spend $70,000 of the school's money. So, among the people who had, signing bank authority within the upper administration, that would only be a handful of people, fewer than 10 people. So if this president was anything less than a complete idiot, he could have held a meeting and an investigation and said, look, we're missing $70,000 here, and we've got this new building, and I don't have any idea what happened. We're going to have an investigation, or somebody needs to come clean and tell me what the hell happened here. He could have done that, but he didn't have the balls to do it. The other thing, I think I was going to add one more. Oh, yeah, I've already tried to say this twice now. What I think was happening is that the upper administrators probably had created a fake independent business outside. Let's call it, whatever, university services or technical services or, idiot and son construction company. So I suspect that they had formed like an LLC outside of the school, which would be very easy to do and with no paper trail, or very little paper trail, because they could put that in the name of a relative or a neighbor or friends or family or whatever. And I suspect that the money was being shuttled through an independent business, and then that was going into the pockets of the same administrators who were paying off this money. So to finish off that paragraph, that's one of the problems with these upper circles of corruption when they reach a certain critical mass, is probably how I'll edit that, is that this critical mass of corruption begins to take on a life of its own. And even the ringleader of corruption, let's assume it's the president, eventually gets blackmailed by his own fellow administrators because none of them can stop the others from participating in the reckless corruption they've all allowed to take place. Two and a half more pages, but these are big pages. In order to maintain, let me make sure this is correct. Yes. In order to maintain an upper administration of incompetent and corrupt buffoonery, one has to fill the ranks and stack the deck with subordinates who don't ask too many questions and who don't have high expectations for the performance of the university institution. So that's true. I remember two examples specifically. Well, actually, more than that. I noticed that when we had the opportunity to hire new faculty members or new staff, some of those new hires were just absolutely stupid at a level that should have been obvious to anybody, in the world of academics. So, two examples. I remember one time they were hiring this guy who had 2 doctorate degrees. And in his so-called, I mean, it was all a pony show. It was all bread and circus. But in order to hire this guy, they had to do some interview process, which included this guy giving a presentation to the campus. And I attended the presentation. And so this guy is up there because he got his PhD. He was a chiropractor with a PhD, which is a dangerous combination. And he's up there presenting, his research, so-called research, which apparently was what he did his PhD work on. And so he's up there, and his presentation was so stupid, I couldn't help but ask him about his presentation in front of the whole meeting. So he was presenting his data, and everyone was just eating it up because all these idiots don't know crap about research or legitimate academia. So the president's like sitting right next to me, and the vice president, his girlfriend, practically his girlfriend, sitting next, even though it's a guy, sitting next to him. They were like bosom buddies. They're sitting there eating this stuff up, and I said, what are the implications of your research? You're showing data as if it has implications, but you never studied the implications to see if this has any effect in the real world. And he said, I asked that, in the meeting. This was in the, university assembly room, so to speak. And I said, you're showing data alluding to implications, but you didn't document that the implications actually played out in the real world. And he said, yeah, we didn't look at that. So the whole thing was bullshit. So anyway, that's an example of hiring a dumbass into an administrative position because all they want is fucking chaos. They need people to go along with their bullshit so they can keep running their bullshit. So that was one example of an upper level administrator. And I think he was actually responsible, at least in part, for firing me. But by that time, I could already tell the bullshit was just getting too thick. Another time, we had to hire an IT guy. We needed to expand the IT department. So we interviewed 2 guys for IT. One guy was young and really enthusiastic and really dedicated to academics. He said, my passion is students and ensuring that we have an efficient platform for transmitting, our educational material to these students. He said, that's my passion. He said, I want to make a great platform that works for the students. The other applicant was an older guy, and the age difference here is important. If you're interviewing 2 candidates and one is a young, enthusiastic go-getter with high standards, he's probably going to have more job options than an older guy who just really doesn't give a flying fuck about anything. And the difference between these 2 candidates was very clear. One guy, high energy, high integrity, dedicated to the teaching and learning process. And another guy who had done some half-ass projects, but didn't demonstrate any enthusiasm. So who did the school hire? They hired the older guy who didn't care. Why? Because he's an easier target to manipulate. He's an older guy. He was literally at retirement age. But the fact that he's applying for the job means he needs the money. And so they knew that if they hired the older guy who needed money, he would be the one more likely to comply with the bullshit. And that is what happened. In order to maintain an upper administration of incompetent and corrupt buffoonery, one has to fill the ranks and stack the deck with subordinates who don't ask too many questions and who don't have high expectations for the performance of the university institution. What this means in practical terms for the remaining faculty is that they will be underserved and overworked as they have to compensate for a lower quality or outright incompetent infrastructure of internet technology, teachers' assistants, and other mid-level employees and managers. So all that's true. That's why, like I said, this guy that they hired for the IT leadership, whatever, he sucked. And, I, as a professor, was having to upload my videos to YouTube or other platforms. And they couldn't even, now I'm remembering a little more accurately, these idiots couldn't even manage a 15-minute video. So, I, as a triple doctorate, multiple published professor who takes academia seriously, I would make my lectures easily an hour. I mean, goddamn, if all these kids and students can sit through a movie for 2 hours, but these administrator people, faculty and staff, they were telling me that I had to make my videos less than 15 minutes long. I mean, damn, at any level of, graduate level education, doctorate level education, people need to be able to handle more than, 15 minutes at a time. But I remember now very clearly, the guy who was in charge of this aspect of the platform, I remember him telling me, he said, you have to make your videos 15 minutes or less, because he said, I can't post a video that's more than 15 minutes. I mean, that's the level of bullshit that was getting dumped on me at this place. The only people who are safe from the consequences of academic corruption are the janitors and lawn maintenance crew. Everyone else on campus is going to suffer through frustration, confusion, reduced professional development, and lower standards. And lower pay for their work, and outright gaslighting. Let me see if I need to clean up this sentence. The only people who are safe from the consequences of academic corruption are the janitors and lawn maintenance crew. Everyone else on campus is going to suffer through frustration, confusion, reduced professional development, lower standards, lower pay for their work, and outright gaslighting on a daily and weekly basis for the duration of their, I should say, miserable careers. Miserable careers on chiropractic campus. Sorry, but that's the way it is. So, like I said, I mean, I've been in this field for more than 20 years, 25 years, or more, 25 years. And believe me, I've heard a lot of stories. People virtually crying. People developing post-traumatic stress disorder for working in these chiropractic schools. And when I posted the most recent drafts of this article, which I just posted yesterday, sent it out to about 8,000 people, maybe more. The feedback that I've gotten, either publicly on the website or privately through emails and text messages, is, yeah, this happens everywhere within Chiroland. So I'm trying to think if I want to. I'll mention this, and then I'm going to take a short biological break, assuming that I might be able to access it right now. I just got this message this morning, but this was a uniquely potent reply from a chiropractor who I've been in touch with now for several years, but I never knew his story about what was going on. Let me see if I can find it real quick. And then, like I said, I'm going to take a quick break. Yeah, maybe this is it. Yeah, so let's see. So here's what this chiropractor wrote to me this morning. He says, "Oh boy, this brings up some old memories. I was the first freshman class at a newly opened chiropractic college campus in such and such year. It was September of 1990. So I started chiropractic college in 1992. In the first trimester, the administration had a group meeting in the auditorium of the campus. I don't recall all of it, but the one bit I do recollect was an announcement from the director of accounting, who told the class they had found $1 million. My internal conversation was, "What the fuck? That's a lot of money." Then the director of the outpatient clinics announced that the school would not open the clinic that they had promised to us because supposedly the numbers didn't work out. This happened to be one of the reasons why I attended this school, because the campus and the new clinic were going to be close to where I lived. So if they opened that clinic, I wouldn't have to relocate again. So this announcement, on top of the lost and found $1 million, were obviously two big red flags. I was not the only one pissed about the change in the clinic location. So our class formed a committee to investigate. I put myself in charge of doing the math to calculate the optimal numbers, and as it turns out, the numbers were actually favorable for the new clinic. I suspected that the president had friends in that particular region that didn't want competition from a new clinic, and that's why they scrapped the plan, even though that's what they had promised us when we were applying to attend the school. We had a scheduled meeting with the administrators during which our class and the new freshman class could attend, but only the presidents of the class would be allowed to ask questions to the 4 or 5 administrator attendees. I think it was the morning of that meeting or the day before, I went into the cafeteria to get a coffee. While I was there, I saw the director of the clinics having breakfast by himself. I walked up, introduced myself, and shared my data and calculations with him. He went off like a volcano. "Where did you get this?" and blew the house down. I walked away. Either that day or the next day was the meeting. It was all bullshit as far as I can recall. But after the meeting was over, the president took our class president aside and said to tell me, this particular student chiropractor, to back off if he wants to graduate from here. Needless to say, I didn't push it any further. I graduated and have never responded to any requests for donations. I hope the school goes bankrupt. Chiropractic, this is almost the end. The chiropractic is just my license. It's a shit profession based on P.T. Barnum, bone out of place theory bullshit. Keep up the good work, Doc. So, again, that was just sent to me in reply to the first draft, which I just sent out yesterday. I'm going to have to take a quick break here because I've been at this for an hour and 15 minutes, and I'll be right back. All right, so continuing on now. I realize my machines are going to run out of space here eventually, so I am trying to get through this. By the way, this is the Central Plaza of Orense, Spain, where I used to live. And this is a hand-painted picture of Nietzsche, done by a friend of mine who's a fantastic artist. That was a birthday present. And then this other picture behind me is also the Roman bridges of Orense, Spain, where we had our farm for 5 years. Yeah. And then these other two pictures are just paintings that I like. What else? Yeah, so here we go. So I'll try to speed up and be efficient here because, like I said, eventually these machines are going to run out of space. I will provide 2 more concrete examples of what I consider to be academic corruption, so blatantly obvious that the experiences were simply baffling and bewildering. During an on-site review with the U.S. Department of Education approved pay-to-play regional accreditor, we as faculty specifically described our high academic standards, verbally and in writing, so they would approve our program and any in-process changes. As things would turn out, everything we said to them was a lie, because after we had our changes to the program approved, then upper administrators simply backed off the standards and allowed the students to pass courses without meeting the stated requirements. For example, we claimed to require verbal examinations and a comprehensive final examination that was professionally supervised or proctored. But instead, that should probably be a semicolon. But instead, the upper administrators replaced the high stakes requirements with a simple subjective reflective writing exercise in which students expressed their feelings about their experience in the program. This was obviously a complete insult to anyone that was trying to take a graduate level program seriously. So yeah, that's what happened. So we were supposed to have verbal exams, and we were supposed to have that test, functional knowledge in the moment. You either know the answer or you don't. You can't bullshit your way through this. So if I'm the professor and we're talking by audio or video, and I say to you, what are the clinical manifestations of transverse myelitis? You either know it or you don't, but you can't bullshit your way through it like you can with a multiple choice exam, just clicking around and trying to figure it out. So verbal exams for a quality program are important, and a high stakes proctored exam is also important. I mean, that's how we got tested for our medical licenses in the United States. They were multiple choice exams, all done on computer in proctored examination centers. So you go in, you show your ID, you have to have your picture taken, and you take your exam. But the other thing about this, and here's a distinction between high-level graduate school or doctorate school versus a low-level school. So I just said that the tests were multiple choice exams. Well, typically when you think of a multiple choice exam, you might have 5 answers and you have to pick one of the 5. Well, that gives you a 20% chance of getting it right even if you don't know shit. So the high stakes proctored supervised exams we took for medical licensure in the United States, yes, they were multiple choice, but they had 13 choices, which means you have about a 7% chance of randomly selecting the best answer. So, when I talked earlier about, academic rigor and, chiropractic colleges versus like a top-ranked medical school, and the medical school I graduated from was top-ranked at that time. It was for family medicine, rural medicine, etc. It was somewhere around the top 20 within the United States. So I graduated from a top-ranked medical school. I was in the top 10% of my class. I scored in the top 1% and top 5% on the U.S. medical licensing exams. So yeah, I know how to fucking take an exam, and I know what academic rigor looks like, okay? More than these buffoons at this chiropractic college. So, when I saw that the administrators would present, verbal and written facts to the regional accreditors, and then change whatever the hell they wanted. So they would get their changes and they would get their programs approved, and then they would do whatever the hell they want. So again, we were supposed to have verbal and high stakes, high intensity exams, and they turned the graduation requirement into a reflective writing exercise. I mean, that's just bullshit. Less obvious but more pervasive was the fact that upper administrators allowed our students to pass all of the online quizzes and examinations by simply randomly clicking on the provided answers, because our online educational platform was programmed to reveal the correct answers, so that essentially, and this is a little bit redundant, but that's just because I'm trying to make this very clear, so that essentially all students could pass the exams whether they had studied the material or not. This was brought to the attention of upper administration after the students themselves complained about the low quality standards of the program. And the administrative response was to fire the concerned professor to whom the students had confided. This is another example of a scorched earth policy and perpetual erasure of institutional memory. In this particular school, the chiropractic administrators fired and replaced 18 top faculty members within 18 months. A remarkably high percentage for a small school. I'm sure that was half the faculty. They fired and replaced 18 top faculty members within 18 months. And the bullshit went on after that. The person who sent that to me was eventually fired, so then I didn't have access to the inside information anymore. Effectively clear-cutting the experienced faculty and erasing the institutional memory, while further insulating upper administrators behind shields of faculty intimidation and forced erasure of evidence and witnesses. So this morning I added the following extended sentence. If the U.S. Department of Education and its regional proxies cared to demonstrate any minimal level of interest and competence, then they would have initiated investigations after witnessing such massive elimination and replacement of faculty, because, number one, massive clear-cutting of faculty is obviously an indication of administrative misbehavior and faculty intimidation and abuse, quite likely camouflaging other corruption, which inevitably has a paper trail and bookkeeping evidence. And number two, replacement of experienced faculty. So the first thing, if a school fires half or more of their faculty and staff within 18 months, something's going wrong. Something's wrong there. And usually that's just the tip of the iceberg. So that's my first point. My second point, replacement of experienced faculty with neophytes or scabs is guaranteed to negatively impact the quality of the educational experience. But these campuses are allowed to burn and riot without the slightest regulatory supervision and intervention. Again, if any professor or student, for that matter, starts to ask uncomfortable questions, such as about the fake online educational platform, or the missing money from the budget, and the disappearance of millions of dollars. I mean, look at what this guy just emailed me this morning. He said the school itself admitted that they had lost and then found $1 million. If any professor, I guess I'll say, or student, starts to ask uncomfortable questions, maybe I'll include his email in my final text. If any professor or student starts to ask uncomfortable questions, such as about the fake online educational platform or the missing money from the budget and the disappearance of millions of dollars, they can easily be terminated and immediately threatened by aggressive lawsuits, lawyers, paid for by school dollars. And this, notice, look at what's about to happen. The pitiful underpaid professors would have to defend themselves from their own, I'll say, modest salaries and savings, using their own after-tax income to combat a multi-million-dollar tax-free nonprofit institution. So, yeah, I've lived that one too. So imagine being a professor at one of these chiropractic colleges, getting fired overnight by email without any conversation, and then receiving threatening emails and delivered letters from lawyers or law firms paid for by the school, threatening that if you say anything, they're going to sue the hell out of you. Well, see, that's how these chiropractic presidents function in order to, protect themselves and whatever, protect all this bullshit and abuse, is they intimidate people. So, like I said, I had given a lecture to the students the night before. When I woke up the next day, I had been fired by email, and I was receiving threatening, I believe, email, and certainly a delivered letter to my front door, and maybe a phone call or whatever. By that time, if they fired me, I'm not answering their fucking phone calls, so I didn't care. But let's see, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so, but imagine me as a professor, because, professor salaries are obviously pretty modest. And then what am I going to do? Spend tens of thousands of dollars defending myself against a chiropractic college that's using tax-free donations to fund these rabid attorneys? I mean, that's just impossible. They could go on for years doing that. And I'm paying out of pocket, for attorneys. I mean, it's just impossible. The pitiful underpaid professors would have to defend themselves from their own modest salaries and savings, using their own after-tax income to combat a multi-million-dollar tax-free nonprofit institution. This imbalance allows corrupt administrators to use the full force of their tax-free, tax-deductible nonprofit institutions to wage legal and psychological warfare against truth-telling teachers. No surprise that the insanity, crazy-making, gaslighting, hazing, abuse, and legal psychological warfare doled out by administrators is more than enough to force many chiropractic professionals out of their own profession and toward, let me just write, and toward depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah, well, that's true. I know a guy, he was kind of a friend of mine, for that time anyway. He was a high-integrity academic administrator. He gave, he developed programs for the school that were worth millions of dollars, of course. And I was one of his faculty members within his program. And I think the school was driving him insane through abuse and tapping his phone and reading his emails and kind of almost to the point where as if they had hired a private investigator to just watch him 24/7. I mean, it was just totally insane. And this guy's a good guy. He's just trying to do good work. But I think that they just about drove him insane. Certainly to depression and anxiety and probably to post-traumatic stress disorder. And I've maintained minimal contact with him, and I think I don't know if he'll ever recover. The irony here is that the profession is constantly slashing and burning its own small crop of the more studious, needs an extra word in there somewhere, of its more studious, academically minded would-be teachers, authors, and scholars. So yeah, the chiropractic profession is constantly destroying itself, basically. And that's why it doesn't advance very well or at all. In the United States, accreditation of a chiropractic college or university is utterly meaningless with regard to the quality of the education. Accreditation simply means filling out paperwork, overpromising whatever they want to promise. High standards of academic rigor. I mean, you look at any catalog at any school, they all say the same bullshit. Overpromising high standards of academic rigor to prepare our students for their careers as professionals, or anything that sounds similar to that, and having a clean, accessible campus and pretty-looking brochures with paid models posing as happy students. Paperwork and site visits are pathetic means for the assurance of academic quality in higher education, because any conniving and convincing imbecile can fraud a glossy program description, and any half-sober administrators can put on a happy face for half a day of softball questions from the regional accreditors. Since the regional accreditors have effectively zero oversight from the U.S. Department of Education. So, the way, thanks to Ronald Reagan, basically, back in the 1980s, they started basically systematically dismantling the infrastructure of the United States. So, at around those times, or those years, the U.S. Department of Education used to supervise, the quality of education in the United States, and that's why education meant something. But then they dismantled the regional offices and privatized them, even though they're nonprofit organizations. If you go to their websites, if you go to a website called GuideStar, I believe that's the name of it, you can find information about nonprofit organizations and how they pay themselves. I think another website exists, but I think the one that I've used is called GuideStar. That was 15 years ago. But basically, the U.S. Department of Education accredits or authorizes these regional accreditors, which are they're just businesses. They're just private businesses, to then look at the documents of the schools within their region. But it's all profit. I mean, there's no quality control involved. It's just bullshit. Since the regional accreditors have effectively zero oversight by the U.S. Department of Education, and because they are effectively paid to turn a blind eye toward programs that they are paid to approve, they don't probe very deeply, and they don't investigate complaints of wrongdoing, except in the most egregious situations, and/or when doing so has a strategic end or political taint to it. So if you want to see how completely stupid this is, those privatized regional accreditors actually allow school presidents within their board of governance. So it's already bad enough that this privatized group is receiving money from the schools that it approves. So obviously they have incentive to approve everything and to make these programs bigger and bigger. That's already bad enough, but the school presidents can also infiltrate the organization itself, and then they know everything that's going on. They've got personal emails, personal phone numbers. They have no risk of being investigated because someone within the group will tell them what's happening. They'll say, hey, you're going to get investigated next Thursday. Better clean your shit up. And it's just bullshit. I mean, it's just crazy. Oh, but I mean, look at how stupid this is. Imagine a certain region of the United States, and you've got a president of a school who's paying himself to make more money for the school, and he's within the administration of the regional accreditor. And let's say another school wants to open a program that's going to compete with his school. Well, he can clusterfuck their program. Because he's part of the governing accreditation system that will either approve or not approve the competition. Well, obviously he's going to make it hard for them. But he'll make it easy on himself, and he'll get inside tips and information on how to, grease the skids for his own program. It's just crazy. So that's what I mean when I say strategic end or political taint. So they don't investigate their friends, but they investigate the competition. Making matters worse, of course, is when corrupt academicians infiltrate the corpus of the regional accreditors such that they are well connected and well informed of any possible spontaneous and semi-legitimate quality checks or investigations. In essence, the lack of oversight from the U.S. Department of Education and the obvious conflict of interest within the pay-to-play regional accreditors means that accreditation in American education is meaningless. Again, it just means that an institution filled out paperwork, satisfied a list of non-academic requirements, such as fire escapes and building accessibility, and was able to bluff their way through some low-level interviews and softball questions that any trickster could knock out of the park. There it is. Academic corruption itself is itself a paradox, because theoretically the entire reason for the existence of academia is the accumulation and transmission of truth. Within the academia of healthcare, another higher outcome-based standard applies to the entire enterprise. If legitimate academia has a requirement to respect the truth, then healthcare academia, whether it's chiropractic or naturopathic medicine or clinical nutrition, healthcare academia has the additional demand to produce ethical and competent graduates that can ensure the life and death responsibilities that are intrinsic to patient care. Corruption of healthcare academia therefore carries an even heavier weight than academic corruption in general, because of the increased probability of ultimately increased risk of negligence and injury for patients. But I'm hesitant to equate chiropractic academic corruption directly with lower professional performance. Indeed, the healthcare delivered by chiropractors has consistently been found to be safe and beneficial, specifically for neck pain, low back pain, and other musculoskeletal complaints. This contrasts with the remarkable lack of safety, lack of efficacy, and lack of supporting evidence of medical drug interventions for chronic pain. So yeah, that's true. In the article, I hyperlink to a video that I did recently about chronic pain management. Healthcare and medicine is always surprising. But in that video, which you can look at on my website, in that video I reviewed the recent guidelines, relatively recent, I think it was 2021, the recent guidelines that were published by the American Academy of Family Physicians for the management of chronic pain. And I was looking at that document, reviewing it in a video session on my website. And the official guidelines had no evidence to supporting what the hell they were doing. So, a point among among the millions of points that I can make and have made, is that medicine certainly has its corruption and stupidity as well. Again, what I'm referencing here, in a video that's available online for free, I believe, is that the recent guidelines, 2021, right now we're in 2024, so these are still very recent. This was published by the American Academy of Family Physicians. Their own guidelines for the management of chronic pain show that they have no evidence of safety and effectiveness for the very guidelines that they're enforcing, or at least publishing. I think that one must. So here I'm giving the chiropractic profession, I'm giving them a little bit of a break here, because a lot of my friends are chiropractors and a lot of them are good. Hell, one of my best local friends is a chiropractor, and I just got treated by him this past week after coughing for 2 weeks. Obviously had a lot of musculoskeletal stuff going on. I mean, I think from my own experience, personal experience, I mean, I love the chiropractic adjustment. I think it's a great tool, and I say that here in a few minutes. I think that one must differentiate between the administrators, the teachers, students, and the practicing clinicians. One cannot equate the behavior of one of these groups with the behavior of others, even if the continuum might appear instinctively correct. In my experience, having taught thousands of practicing chiropractors, I found that most of them were hardworking, honest, and desirous of advancing their professional skills for the betterment of their own careers and also for the betterment of patient outcomes. See, oh, that's true. So here's something that I didn't add, and I've thought about adding this now twice. Let's see if it's worth adding. But like academic corruption in a school, administrative corruption like we're talking about. Yes, it hurts the best students because they don't get to learn from really great professors. I guess I'll add this. I'll just make a note. Yes, it hurts the best students, but the best, hardworking, smart, resourceful students are going to continue to be hardworking, smart, and resourceful. Like I had a few professors in chiropractic college that I thought sucked or they were just boring, so I went to the library instead to look at articles. So that's a perfect example. A bad professor isn't going to necessarily stop a good student. But a bad, low-quality program will certainly help the bad students who can just click around on the website and figure out the right answer and pass the exam. Or who don't have to meet rigorous standards for graduation. You know, if you change the requirement from a verbal exam that can't be bullshitted and a high-stakes, proctored, supervised, multiple-choice exam where every question has 13 different options, if you change from that to letting the students write a reflective writing essay about their feelings, that only helps the bad students. However, administrative corruption in chiropractic clearly retards the advancement of the profession as a whole. Most obviously because quality schools have traditionally done more than merely educate students. Better schools and legitimate universities have also supported research and supported the careers of professors to advance the science of their topics and to serve as a repository for knowledge and a guiding example of professionalism. These concepts and practices are essentially non-existent within chiropractic culture. This explains why the chiropractic profession advances slowly when and if it advances at all. The breadth and profundity of the chiropractic profession remain narrow and shallow because those who would enlarge the profession are excluded from the profession's institutions by corrupt and viciously insecure administrators. all of that's true and accurate. You won't find many or any distinguished professors or professors emeriti within chiropractic academia because they aren't allowed to exist in an academic environment centered around simplicity and profitability. The institutions don't have enough stability and foresight to cultivate the development of profound scholasticism, nor the scholarship necessary to advance the science and practice of chiropractic. No surprise, I should probably be there. No surprise then, let me see, I have to clean this up. No surprise then, of course, that many chiropractors find this is sad but true, and this was reflected in the email that I read earlier. The guy says, basically, I just use my chiropractic license so I can do other things. No surprise then, of course, that many chiropractors find the only way to advance their career is to paradoxically leave their profession by seeking other degrees and quite commonly ignoring or denying the fact that they were ever chiropractors in the first place. Even in my own situation of having been a chiropractic scholar and advocate, I don't even mention the chiropractic colleges where I have worked on my resume. This is all the more ironic because I consider my chiropractic education to have been quite excellent at the time. I graduated in '96. And I went on to attain 2 additional doctoral degrees in other healthcare fields. And then I'm probably going to add a sentence about good, bad students. So like I said, even with all this bullshit going on in these chiropractic colleges, that doesn't condemn the entire profession. Because the people who want to be excellent will still be excellent. And they go to postgraduate trainings and do other things. So it's not like the school is their only source of education. But it does retard the entire profession. And it certainly allows low-performing students to graduate when otherwise they wouldn't be allowed to graduate. All right, 4 more paragraphs, even though these pages are quite large. No doubt exists that the chiropractic profession's worst enemy is itself. As I've said in my decades of articles and presentations, if any one American healthcare profession could positively change the course of health outcomes literally overnight, then that profession is chiropractic. The chiropractic adjustment is an irreplaceable clinical tool, and the profession could still have and should already have advanced to a more prominent position in healthcare and professionalism. Those who continue to allow and perpetuate corruption and profiteering within chiropractic leadership and academia are those who are most to blame for the profession's retardation, lack of direction, delayed development, and the perpetual inability of the profession to complete its greater promise to its students, its clinicians, and the public. Again, you can download this document and read it yourself. Some of these statements, like that last one, are spot on, 100% perfect, if I may say so. In 2009, I published Chiropractic and Naturopathic Mastery of Common Clinical Disorders, detailing the integrative chiropractic management of several primary care conditions. But did the profession advance in any meaningful way? I think that book was 600 pages. In 2010, I published Chiropractors Managing Chronic Hypertension, an idea whose time has arrived, in the profession's biggest newspaper magazine, Dynamic Chiropractic. That was 2010, June. And in 2011, Maybe that needs a comma. And in 2011, I just don't like the ones right next to the I because they all look like the same symbol. In 2011, I published the clinical handbook textbook, Integrative Chiropractic Management of Chronic Hypertension and High Blood Pressure, second edition. And I handed a copy directly. So again, what I'm stating there is I published this idea in the profession's biggest newspaper, and I published it as a textbook, and I gave a copy of that textbook directly to the president of the American Chiropractic Association. I handed it to him. But apparently nothing changed for the profession as a whole. No action, no initiative, no conversation. In 2014, I published Chiropractic Immune Nutrition Against Viral Infections, but the chiropractic profession demonstrated zero leadership during the global viral pandemic chaos of 2019 that has continued to the present day. All of those previous works have been compiled and updated in my book, Inflammation Mastery, 4th edition. That was published in 2016. I wanted more, so now we're at the very last page. I wanted more for chiropractic. I reasonably expected more from chiropractic. I never dreamed that my experience in chiropractic academics would result in my writing essays on administrative incompetence, faculty abuse, lost professional opportunities, and drawing interconnected maps of academic corruption. Again, you can see the map of academic corruption that I included in the document. But such has been the result of my experience, corroborated by the experiences of many, too many, of my colleagues, friends, and students within chiropractic. If you ever wonder why the chiropractic profession is so slow to advance, you need look no further. I don't know if that should be farther or further, but I'll look it up. You need look no further. I think that's correct. I mean, it all depends on how you can use those words almost interchangeably in just about all situations. Farther just means more in the distance, which is consistent with how we look at things. We look at things in the distance. If we want to look for more things, we look more in the distance, typically. But further means additionally or by extension. So either one of those words is correct, farther or further. If you ever wonder why the chiropractic profession is so slow to advance, you need look no further than the corrupt administrators and inept. I think I actually like further in there better. You need look no farther than the corrupt administrators and inept leadership that repels and actively. This is perfect. If you ever wonder why the chiropractic profession is so slow to advance, you need look no farther than the corrupt administrators and inept leadership that repels and actively eliminates the true leaders, scholars, clinicians, and teachers who would otherwise advance the profession. That should probably be bold. That was a good sentence. Yeah, so a lot of these administrators are just insecure little turdlets, and they don't know a damn thing. But they have the vocabulary, and they have the language. So I remember the same guy that I referenced earlier, the guy who was a DC PhD. I told you that's a dangerous combination. We were in the office of the president, talking. And eventually arguing. And even his last words to me, and I think he fired me later. His last words to me were, "Fuck you." And he got up and stormed out of the room. And the reason he said "fuck you" was because he was such a bullshitter, and I was sick of his bullshit. And part of his bullshit was that he considered himself to be a primary care physician. And I remember now, I had already been through medical school and some postgraduate medical training. So I knew what primary care was. A lot of chiropractic cheerleaders, and I don't think I ever did this. I hope I never did it. But they'll tell the students, oh, well, you're as good as a medical doctor, you're primary care. And they don't even know what the fuck primary care means. So let me tell you what primary care means. Primary care means the ability to diagnose and manage, like the top 100 list of most common complaints. Well, chiropractic training and licensure doesn't get you there. You can be really good. You can try hard. You can have an office with 20 people in it, like assistants or whatever. That doesn't get you to primary care. Again, the definition of primary care medicine is the ability to diagnose and manage, again, like a list of whatever the top 100 or 200 presentations are. Well, I'll go back and point the finger at this guy because he was just a bullshitter. And I was basically telling him in this meeting, I said, you're not primary care and you don't even know what primary care is. His response was to stand up and scream in my face, fuck you, and then he stormed out of the meeting. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But again, diagnose and manage the top 100 diagnoses. That includes things like pregnancy, pending abortion, normal pregnancy and birth. Like I've delivered a lot of babies because I went to medical school, and that's where I delivered a lot of babies. But going to chiropractic college didn't teach me how to deliver babies. And normal pregnancy and birth is a normal condition that you have to be able to know how to manage if you're going to call yourself primary care. Same thing with pneumonia, same thing with pulmonary edema, same thing with congestive heart failure, liver failure, renal failure. You have to know what are the diagnoses, and those are the qualifications for being called primary care. Not all doctors are primary care. You have to know the diagnostic criteria. You have to know how to do the physical exam and any necessary lab tests. And you have to have, within your scope of practice, you have to have the ability not simply to diagnose, but also to manage those conditions. If you don't know how to manage ascites, and if you don't have the scope of practice to manage ascites, then you're not primary care. You would have to have access to at least prescription drugs like diuretics, and maybe even intravenous administration in an acute setting. If you don't know, and you have and this is one of the good things, and this was an aha moment for me when I was in medical training. I was already, I had already had 2 doctorate degrees in other professions. I had been licensed, I had taught, I had practiced. But working in a hospital is a whole different level. And so, for example, like I just threw out the example of ascites. Well, you also have to know, again, to be primary care, you have to know how to diagnose ascites, you have to know how to manage it, and you have to have the scope of practice to manage it. That's not within chiropractic, I don't know if any exceptions exist, but it certainly doesn't apply to 99% of the profession. But you also have to know how to manage the complications of those diseases. So here's a quiz question for you. And you either know the answer to this or you don't. And this is the type of distinction that's black and white between primary care versus someone who's not primary care. I'll give you two examples. You would have to know, first of all, you have to know this stuff ahead of time so that you even know that you need to know it. But let's say you're dealing with somebody who's got ascites from liver failure. How do you assess them? You can't just wait for them to walk in and say, hey, I got diagnosed with ascites and liver failure from another doctor. You have to be able to know how to make that diagnosis. And these aren't just black and white. You don't just make a diagnosis and say that's done. You have to know how to evaluate what stage or level that patient is in within that diagnosis. So here's ascites and liver failure. You would then have to know how to calculate the MELD score to find out where they are on that continuum. And you can use other scoring methods as well. But you have to know that those scoring methods exist to even know that you need to look it up. But you would also then have to know what are the and again, this is basic primary care stuff. Black and white, you either know it or you don't. You got a patient with ascites, you determine it's because they have liver failure. What does their hematocrit and hemogram look like? If you don't know that level of knowledge, you're not primary care, okay? Black and white. Within chiropractic, and I experienced this too when I was a chiropractic student starting at Texas Chiropractic College in 1992. We were told, this was all bullshit, it was all marketing. We were told that we, the chiropractors, were en route to being the gatekeepers of healthcare. Oh, and the other thing you see a lot within the chiropractic profession is they use this quote that's attributed to Thomas Edison, where he says, the doctor of the future will not give any medicines, but he'll interest his patient in the care of the spine and daily routine and diet. So, within the chiropractic lexicon, you'll see these terms, doctors of the future and also gatekeepers. You don't see so much of it anymore. But along with that is, if you're the gatekeeper of the medical profession, which is what we were told when we were in early chiropractic education, the implication of being a gatekeeper to the medical profession is that you're at least as good as they are, if not better. And you're actually better, because that's why you're the gatekeeper. But they're not. Again, going back to primary care, you got to know stuff. You have to have this stuff memorized. You can't, later that day look it up. You have to know this shit in the moment. That's one of the beauties of medical education and medical training, is you have to memorize books. You literally have to memorize entire books to get through it. And I did it, and I ate it up, and I loved it. But again, if you're ever going to even think that you're primary care, you have to know how to diagnose, and you have to have the ability to manage common conditions such as liver failure, renal failure, ascites. If a patient has ascites, you have to know how to calculate where they are in the spectrum of liver failure. One of the tools is called the MELD score. And you got to know that shit. You got to know it in the moment. Your patients in your office, you have to know, are you sending them home or not? You also have to know how to evaluate them for the potential complications of that diagnosis. You can't just say, oh, well, you have ascites. Oh, and it's secondary to liver failure. Oh, and your MELD score is X, therefore placing you at either high or low risk of complications and death. You have to know what goes along with that. So if a patient has ascites, boom, you have to have already said this to yourself if you're primary care and if you know what you're talking about. So I already said you would expect them to be anemic, because if they've got liver failure and ascites and portal hypertension and esophageal varices, then they probably also have splenomegaly, which is causing them to be pancytopenic. If all of that's true, then you know that this patient is at higher risk for spontaneous peritoneal bacteremia, or what is it called? SBP? Yeah, spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. Almost the same. Spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. You have to then put them on prophylactic antibiotics. Are prophylactic antibiotics within the scope of most chiropractors? No. Well, black and white, you can't call yourself primary care if you're not functioning and performing and prescribing at that level. This is a patient who needs diuretics and antibiotics. Are you prescribing antibiotics and diuretics for this patient? If you are not doing it, it's black and white. You're not primary care. And this is just one example out of hundreds. Patient presents with acute non-traumatic monoarthritis. What's your biggest diagnosis there? And how do you manage it? With what drugs? If you don't know the answer to that question, you're not even in the ballpark of primary care. Acute non-traumatic monoarthritis is the diagnosis of this, treated with this until proven otherwise. That's not a question. That's a standard. You either meet that standard and you know exactly what I'm talking about, or you're not there. So anyway, like I was saying, a lot of bullshit gets thrown around about primary care and gatekeepers and doctors of the future. But I, having gone through medical education and training, I could call bullshit on that because these people don't know what they're talking about. But that's part of what I could bring to the profession and academia is I had more training and more experience. I had worked in hospitals, I had delivered babies, I worked in emergency medicine, I worked in urgent care, I worked in family medicine, I worked in internal medicine. I had certifications in pediatrics and obstetrics. I delivered dozens of babies. You know, that's primary care. You're either there or you're not. Final 3 paragraphs. It's still recording, and I'm still recording. Probably going to run out of space pretty soon on one of those devices. As part of their no rules, neoliberal style imperialistic expansion, many of these so-called universities are now offering additional programs in clinical nutrition, functional medicine, and naturopathic medicine. I went to Bastyr University in Seattle, certainly one of the oldest and most traditional schools. But look at the chaos, cheating, gaslighting, unprofessional buffoonery, and administrative anarchy. These schools are functioning and being allowed to run free range as diploma mills with zero legitimate quality control and zero oversight from the now privatized and pay-to-play accreditation system. I just have to clean up some of the punctuation here. I worked briefly as one of the founding professors in a new Doctor of Clinical Nutrition program, where I was told by the 2 upper administrators of the program that I was the only professor in the program brazen enough to require a midterm exam and a comprehensive final exam for the students in my class. That's totally true. So, again, this was a Doctor of Clinical Nutrition program where I was helping design at least my course. And, you know, halfway through the course, the upper administrators emailed me, or we had a video conference or something like that. And they said, our students, look at this bullshit. They said, our students are uncomfortable with the exams. And I said, well, I don't give a shit if they're comfortable or not. I'm the professor and I'm giving this exam. And they said, no, you don't understand. We don't have exams in our doctorate program. Well, how can you have a doctorate program with no exams? Well, they just get these subjective evaluations. I said, well, how can you have a subjective evaluation from a professor in an online doctorate program where the professors never even meet the students. This is bullshit. So I was out of there. I wasn't going to put my name on a goddamn Doctor of Clinical Nutrition program where the students don't even have exams and they don't even meet their professors. That's just bullshit. That's bullshit. I worked briefly as one of the founding professors in a new Doctor of Clinical Nutrition program where I was told by the two upper administrators of the program that I was the only professor in the program brazen enough to require midterm exam and comprehensive final exam for the students in my class. Apparently, the norm at this school was simply to pass and eventually graduate these students based on nothing more than the professor's feelings and subjective evaluation, which is even more absurd considering that most all of these courses were taught online with no direct contact whatsoever between students and professors. Notice another typo. Notice again and sadly that these are all university degrees that have been accredited by the privatized regional representative of the U.S. Department of Education, thereby, again, demonstrating the complete worthlessness of American educational accreditation in the current era. 2 more paragraphs. After seeing the abysmal decline of academic standards in these programs, I fear we are graduating a generation of numbskulls who will leave their diploma mills with nothing more than diplomas and debt. The first of which are worthless except for ego inflation, and the second of which will enslave them for decades while administrators laugh all the way to the bank. That's not a perfectly beautiful sentence, but it says what's correct. So, look at, I don't know if I should even say this. Maybe it's not a good example, but I'll say it anyway. I've studied nutrition my entire adult and teenage life, since the time I was 14. But imagine me having to argue with a doctor of clinical nutrition who went through some bullshit program. So all they have is ego. I've been busting my ass in this field for at least 25 years, But look at these. I've seen, briefly, barely, like the ego and the attitude and the bullshit put out by some of these graduates who have the degree, a diploma that says Doctor of Clinical Nutrition, and they don't know anything. Relatively. They don't know. That's not functioning at a doctorate level. Doctorate level means you are the final word in your subject. That's why it's called a terminal degree. Nothing more exists beyond a doctorate degree. Of course, you can do, postgraduate training and postdocs and even pre-docs. I did a pre-doc with the NIH in the United States. So you can do, pre and postgraduate trainings, but nothing exists beyond the doctorate level. I've got 3 doctorate degrees, and I busted my ass for those degrees. But that's what doctorate means. It means you are the authority. And these kids are being graduated as the authority, Doctor of Clinical Nutrition, and they haven't been held to any standard, any reasonable standard whatsoever. As more healthcare, nutrition, chiropractic, and medicine programs become profiteering, over-glorified correspondence courses, the true burden of life and death risk will be carried by the consumers, clients, and patients. I fear that American academia is collapsing into meaninglessness and graduating these unmentored and untested neophytes with titles of doctor, nutrition, and medicine is going to have harmful repercussions for the professions and for these professions and the patients who will be undertreated, overtreated, and mistreated by these undertrained virtual clinicians. Caveat emptor, the risks of injury and death will be carried by the patients of these undertrained graduates while regulatory agencies currently sit on their hands in inaction and, what I said before, plausible deniability, which this narrative is helping to make undeniable. That's not perfect, but I think it's good enough. This is the final conclusion here. The solutions to these problems are obvious, but the enforcement of ethical and professional expectations has to begin with defining those standards, then ensuring their adherence from multiple positions. You can't just put all your eggs in one basket, because if that basket breaks, like it did at the U.S. Department of Education, then the whole thing is just going to be a shit show. And that's exactly what we've got right now. So you have to have this supervised from multiple angles. Then ensuring their adherence from multiple positions, including students, faculty, community oversight. And the most obvious and most potent, involved in active governmental bodies at the state and national levels with the power to investigate thievery. See, that's the thing. You can't just say, oh, we'll self-govern. We've got a board of trustees. We'll take care of it ourselves. That's bullshit. The board of trustees doesn't have the power to do anything. At least not that I'm aware of. Especially if they're kept in the dark. So you have to have... Let me tell you what a real investigation looks like on campus. This is no bullshit. But see, these examples that I'm about to give you, these examples are things that, your student body association can't do. Your local community of whatever the fuck, neighborhood association, they don't have the power and authority to do this kind of stuff. A real academic investigation means cutting off the power to the campus as the investigators are rolling in to start taking out the computers, emails, cell phones, and printed documents. That's what a real academic investigation looks like. So anything short of that is going to give these people time to fake the documents, hide the emails, and erase the evidence. So again, a legitimate investigation has to be carried out at the police governmental level. They turn off the power to the campus. They go in and pull out the desks, filing cabinets, and computers. And they've already, by that time, blocked the online servers if they have like a cloud service where they keep the documents. So no one can erase the data. That's what should have happened to most of these schools that I've talked about. The most obvious and most potent, involved in active governmental bodies at the state and national levels with the power to investigate thievery, fraud, appropriateness of expenses, program quality, including hiring outside topic experts. Examination integrity, not allowing students to pass their online exams simply by clicking on the answers. And the relentless tax evasion and wage theft that occurs from underpaying part-time but fully disempowered adjunct faculty. These lawless, feral schools need to be investigated and held to account. Otherwise, students will continue to be fleeced and indebted for low-quality education, let me see. This is the last sentence, but maybe I need to split it up. These lawless, feral schools need to be investigated and held to account. Otherwise, students will continue to be fleeced and indebted for low-quality education. Professional standards will be reduced to abject incompetence. National quality of production will continue to decline. And the final consumers, customers, and patients will bear the brunt of undereducated, ego-inflated, unskilled healthcare providers delivering substandard and dangerous healthcare. So yeah, all that's accurate. I might need to read it one more time and clean it up. But yeah, that's the end. And that's all I'm going to do with this. So I'll make those changes. I'll edit this video, which is now at 2 hours and 22 minutes. I'm not going to edit it. I'll format it. I'll put it on the website with the different screenshots that I have. But the only part I'm going to edit out is when I went to the bathroom. So you're not looking at the wall for a few minutes. But, you know, like with most of my work, I don't rehearse it. I mean, obviously, I have proofread this once, the earlier version, but this was just spontaneous proofreading. So I will publish this today through multiple platforms. And like I said, the feedback I've gotten on this so far has been overwhelmingly positive. I'm going to turn off this recording right now. The feedback I've gotten on this has been completely positive. But also sad. I mean, no one wants to talk bad about their own experience and their own profession, but at some point we have to overcome that discomfort on a personal level and think about the future of other students, the future of patients, the reputation of the profession, and we have to call it out and say, this is bullshit. You're ripping off these students. You're endangering the patients who are going to see those student graduates. And you're making the whole profession look like a bunch of fucking jackasses by behaving like jackasses. So, yeah, I'm going to publish this and people can like it or not like it. I don't care. That's one of the beautiful things about getting older and, you know, gaining whatever level of independence. Oh, and also, I must say, it's a beautiful thing about being Generation X. Because in Generation X, we had uniquely no fucks to give. And the beautiful thing about getting older and reflecting and cherishing the experience of being Generation X is I realized I'm entitled to have no fucks to give. That's part of our generation. Like I remember when I was a kid, when I was, you know, in my whatever mid-teens or something, we were skate punks and surf punks and punks, and I don't know if this term exists in current, you know, society among young people like it did for us. But I do remember, because I used to skate with this kid, I think his name was Brian. And he was more hardcore than I was, because I was always trying to not break bones and shit. But he was, you know, we used to skate together and jump off of things. But I remember he would talk bad about other people sometimes. He would say, oh, that guy's just a poser. And if you look at these chiropractic academicians who tell their students, oh, well, you're primary care, you're a gatekeeper, that's bullshit. They're just posers. Like, they're just posing like they know what the fuck they're talking about, and they don't. Oh, the other thing, oh, yeah, and this isn't positive, but it was still part of the, you know, growing up in the 1980s. Oh, but we used to have, like, I remember, this isn't, I don't even know, maybe I won't even mention it. But part of the culture of the 1980s was being held to some level of accountability, you know, like not being a poser. If you're going to dress like a skater and dress like a surfer, you better get your ass out there and skate and surf, you know, not just put on the clothes. And I think that that was part of my experience as a kid. And I think about that now, and when I look at these chiropractic presidents and jackasses parading themselves out there, over-promising things to their students, I'm thinking to myself, you're just a poser. You don't even know what you're talking about. You tell your students to keep them paying the tuition. You tell your students, oh, you're going to be doctor of the future, you're primary care. You're not fucking primary care if you haven't memorized textbooks of information about how to diagnose and manage primary care problems. And you have to know what they are. It's not back pain is there, but it's not just back pain and the occasional urinary tract bladder infection. What are you going to do when your patient has pancytopenia due to splenomegaly secondary to liver failure? That's primary care. What are you going to do when your patient comes in and ends up delivering a baby in your hands. That's primary care. That's why not all doctors are primary care. Neurologists are specialists, but they're not primary care. Orthopedic surgeons are not primary care. So a reflection of the ignorance within the chiropractic profession is they all think we were told this when I graduated from chiropractic college. We were told that we were primary care. Like, that wasn't just me making it up. Because I remember talking to a administrator at another school right after I had graduated. I said, well, we're primary care. We graduated from chiropractic college. She said, you're not primary care. You're primary contact. And I was like, wow, that sucked. I never even heard of that distinction, you know. But you'll see that still within the chiropractic world. Doctor of the future, gatekeeper, primary care. If you're not managing your patients with drugs and sometimes antibiotics and sometimes intravenous antibiotics, you didn't make the cut to primary care. And it doesn't mean you're not a specialist. You can be a specialist and you can be great at your job, but don't call yourself primary care. If you're a neurologist, you're not primary care. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, you're not primary care. If you're a urologist, I don't think you're primary care. If you're a gynecologist, you are primary care, because the training's different. So look at gynecology and obstetrics. I believe those qualify for primary care, but I don't think urology does. And certainly, well, nephrology would be secondary to internal medicine, so maybe you get some leeway there. But anyway, that's it. That's my review of my own document, which I just literally finished this morning. Like I said, I'll put this video up as soon as I can, probably today, because I'm only going to cut out my bathroom break. But otherwise, this has been Dr. Vasquez coming to you live, backed by Friedrich Nietzsche, who provided that beautiful quote at the beginning of this. Maybe I'll read it again, just for fun and closure. It was a beautiful compilation quote that I created myself. These quotes, I believe, I know it's at least 2 books. I don't know if it's 3 books. But it comes from Nietzsche's Antichrist and Ecce Homo. I think Ecce Homo was his last book that he wrote while he was alive and sane. So I'll close it out with this. How much truth can I'll try to close it out with this. How much truth can a spirit endure? I think in one of the books he says, how much truth can a spirit bear? How much truth can a spirit dare? More and more this, and I wrote intellectual integrity, more and more this became for me the real measure of value. Error, faith in the ideal, in other words, bullshitting yourself. Bullshitting yourself is not blindness. Bullshit is cowardice. To endure my seriousness and my passion, the scholar must carry intellectual integrity to the verge of hardness. Which is why, you know, back in Generation X, you were either hardcore or you weren't. You know, you either had to put up or shut up. So, you know, as stupid as it all was, you know, skating and surfing and whatever, we still held ourselves to a standard. We must become indifferent. We must never ask if the truth is useful or if it will be our undoing. At every step and with every word, I added that part. I've been reading Nietzsche for 30 years, so I have some right to interpret him, I think. At every step and with every word, one has to wrestle for truth. One has had to surrender to it almost everything to which the heart, to which our love, our trust in life cling otherwise. That requires greatness of soul. The service of truth is the hardest service. Unquote from Friedrich Nietzsche. This has been Dr. Alex Vasquez coming to you live from inflammationmastery.com. inflammationmastery.substack.com, and my main site where I say anything and everything, which is healthythinking.substack.com. Thank you very much for this 2 hours and 32 minutes, minus a bathroom break and a few edits. Again, I'm not going to edit this. I'm only going to take out the break at the middle, which was exactly at the middle, hour and 15 minutes or so. So take care. See you on the websites. Bye-bye.